The dusty wind swept across the vast wilderness, brushing through the trees and rattling the dry brush. Jack West, a seasoned cowboy, had been riding for hours through the rough terrain, chasing rumors of cattle thieves who had been spotted in the hills. Jack wasn't the type to back down from a challenge, and this mission was no different. He'd been sent by the town to track down the thieves and bring them to justice. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and red, Jack's horse suddenly stumbled, throwing him off balance. He hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of him. For a moment he lay there dazed, his thoughts scattered. He could hear the faint sound of hooves in the distance, but it wasn't his horse. Slowly he pushed himself to his feet, his body aching, his mind alert. He scanned his surroundings, trying to regain his bearings. That's when he heard it, a rustling noise from the bushes nearby. Jack's hand instinctively reached for his rifle, his fingers brushing the cold metal. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew he had to be ready. His heart raced as he slowly stood up, adjusting his stance. From the dense thicket emerged a figure. It was a woman, her skin darkened by the sun, her features sharp and graceful. She moved like the wind, fluid and quick, her eyes cold and calculating. In an instant, she was only a few feet away from him, her hand already gripping a sharp knife. Jack's heart skipped a beat. She was fast, faster than he had anticipated. Without thinking, he raised his rifle, aiming it at her, but the woman's eyes locked onto his, and she didn't hesitate. She lunged forward, her knife flashing in the dimming light. The two of them tumbled to the ground, a blur of motion as they struggled. Jack was strong, but the woman was fierce. She twisted, using her agility to her advantage, knocking the rifle from his grasp. He tried to grab her wrist, but she twisted free, bringing the knife dangerously close to his throat. For a moment, everything froze. Jack's breath was heavy, his mind racing. He had never been in a fight like this before, and the woman seemed to know every move before he made it. But something in her eyes stopped him. It wasn't just the wild determination. There was a sadness there, something he couldn't quite place. Suddenly, Jack's survival instincts kicked in. He managed to pin her down, twisting her arm behind her back, forcing her to the ground. She struggled, but Jack was able to tie her hands, securing her with the ropes he always carried with him. As he stood up, breathless and confused, he looked down at the woman lying on the ground. Her eyes were still filled with defiance, but there was something else in them too. Resignation, maybe even acceptance. Jack didn't know what to make of it. He had never intended to capture anyone, especially not an Apache woman. But now, as he looked at her, he felt a strange connection, something more than just the adrenaline of the fight. She wasn't just a prisoner. She was a person, and that was something Jack had to reckon with. As the evening shadows grew longer, Jack gathered his things and, with the woman in tow, he began the long ride back to town. He didn't know why he was doing it. Was it for the reward? Or was it something deeper, something he couldn't yet explain? The journey back was quiet. The woman didn't speak, and Jack didn't press her for answers. He kept his eyes on the path ahead, the weight of the situation settling on him. He had never expected to be in this position, and he wasn't sure what to do next. When they finally reached the edge of town, the streets were mostly empty, save for a few people who looked up in surprise as Jack rode through with the woman. Whispers began to spread, rumors starting to swirl. By the time he reached the saloon, a small crowd had gathered, eager to see what had happened. Jack dismounted and tied his horse to the post, his eyes scanning the crowd. They were all staring at the woman, who stood defiantly at his side, her gaze unwavering. Some of the men in the crowd were clearly uncomfortable, shifting their weight and muttering among themselves. "She's one of them, ain't she?" one of the men asked, his voice low and cautious. Jack nodded, but he didn't say anything. The woman didn't need to hear the way people talked about her. They had already made up their minds, judging her for being Apache, for being different. Jack knew this wasn't going to be easy, but he wasn't sure what he was supposed to do next. "Well, what now?" another man asked, crossing his arms. Jack wasn't sure what the answer was. He had never thought this far ahead. All he knew was that he had brought her back to town, and now he had to figure out what to do with her. There were laws here, and those laws didn't include Apache women. She was a prisoner, a captive of a war they didn't understand, and Jack wasn't sure if he was doing the right thing by bringing her here. As the crowd grew larger, the whispers became louder. Some men wanted to lock her up. Others wanted to take matters into their own hands. But Jack didn't want to be a part of that. He had to think, and he had to think fast. The The woman didn't speak, her face a mask of stoicism. She stood tall, unafraid of the judgment around her. Jack noticed how the crowd's unease grew, the tension thickening in the air. The fear was palpable. Everyone wanted to know what was going to happen next, but Jack didn't have an answer. He knew he had made a choice, whether he realized it or not. By bringing her here, he had set something in motion, something neither of them could control. Jack didn't know it yet, but the Apache girl would change everything in this town. The ripples of this moment would spread far beyond what anyone could imagine. And Jack, for the first time in his life, was no longer sure of the man he was. He had stepped into something far bigger than just a simple mission, and the consequences would follow him for a long time. The quiet standoff between them lingered in the air, heavy with unspoken words and uncertain futures. But for Jack, there was no going back now. The story was just beginning. The sun had set, and the shadows of the town stretched long across the dusty streets. Jack stood near the saloon, surrounded by a growing crowd of curious townsfolk. The murmurs grew louder as the Apache girl remained silent, her eyes scanning the group with an intensity that unnerved many. She had been brought here as a captive, yet there was something in her presence that made the crowd uneasy. Jack could feel the tension building, and it seemed like everyone was waiting for someone to make the first move. The townspeople were a mix of fear and curiosity. Some were scared of the Apache, of the unknown. Others were angry, believing that Jack had done the right thing by bringing her back, but still unsure of what to do next. There was no law for a situation like this. They had heard of the Apache raids, the bloodshed, and the fear they had lived with for years. But here, standing before them, was a living, breathing Apache woman. She wasn't a story or a myth. She was real, and she had somehow become the center of this town's attention. Jack, feeling the weight of the situation, stepped forward. He hadn't expected to be a hero, and he certainly hadn't expected to be in charge of the girl's fate. "She's not a threat," Jack said, his voice firm but uncertain. "She's just a woman like anyone else." But the crowd wasn't convinced. They had their doubts, their fears. One of the men, a large farmer named Thomas, stepped forward, his face twisted with anger. "What do you mean, like anyone else? She's Apache. They've been killing our cattle, stealing our land. She's not like us." The girl, still tied but standing tall, met Thomas's gaze without flinching. Her silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. There was power in her stillness, and it was beginning to have an effect on the crowd. Some of the men shifted uncomfortably, their anger waning. The woman hadn't said a word, yet she was commanding respect, something they hadn't expected from a captive. Jack stood between the woman and the crowd, his mind racing. He knew what they wanted, what they expected from him. They wanted action, a decision, something they could control. But Jack didn't feel like he was in control anymore. He had never planned for this. He had only wanted to complete his mission, capture the thieves, and return to the safety of the town. But now, with the girl standing before him, everything had changed. "We can't just let her go," Thomas muttered, his voice rising. "She's an Apache, and she'll be a danger to us all." Jack's gaze never left the woman's face. Despite everything, the fear in the town, the tension in the air, she stood her ground. He couldn't help but feel a deep respect for her. She wasn't a captive to be broken. She wasn't someone who would beg for mercy. She was proud, fierce, and determined, and that frightened some of the men. "She's not the enemy," Jack said, his voice steady. "She didn't attack me, and I won't treat her like a prisoner. You want to kill her? You'll have to go through me first." A silence fell over the crowd. Jack's words hung in the air, and for the first time the townsfolk were unsure how to react. They had expected someone to back down, to fall into line, but Jack was different. He wasn't asking for permission. He wasn't bowing to the town's fear. He had made up his mind, and he was willing to stand by it. The girl, still standing, gave Jack a brief glance. Her expression remained neutral, but there was something in her eyes, a hint of understanding. She didn't speak, but her silence was a language of its own. The crowd was split. Some of the men wanted to see her punished, to make an example of her. Others, like Jack, saw something more. They saw the possibility of a change, of breaking free from the cycle of fear and hatred that had kept them trapped for so long. But change wasn't easy, and the town wasn't ready for it. Jack knew he couldn't stay here forever. He had to make a choice, and it had to be now. He looked back at the woman, her dark eyes meeting his, and for a moment, everything else faded away. It was as if she had become a part of the landscape, the hills, the sky, the very earth beneath them. She wasn't just an Apache girl. She was a person who had been caught in a war she didn't start. "Take her to the sheriff's office," Jack finally said. "We'll figure this out. She won't be harmed." "I'll make sure of it." The crowd seemed to hesitate, unsure whether to follow Jack's lead. But in the end, they had no choice. They watched as Jack, with the girl in tow, made his way toward the sheriff's office, a place that had always been a symbol of authority in the town. Inside the sheriff's office, the air was thick with uncertainty. The sheriff, a stout man named Bill, looked up from his desk as Jack entered, leading the woman. Bill raised an eyebrow. "What's this? Another Apache prisoner?" Jack nodded. "She's not a prisoner. She's just a woman. I brought her here to keep her safe. We'll figure out what to do, but I don't want her harmed." Bill scratched his chin, his eyes shifting between Jack and the woman. "You're taking a risk, Jack. You don't know what she's capable of. The Apaches aren't known for their kindness." Jack didn't flinch. "I don't care what they're known for. She didn't attack me. She's not the enemy." The sheriff sighed, rubbing his temples. "We'll see how long that lasts. But for now, she'll stay here. And you, Jack, you better pray you're right." Jack stood tall, his eyes never leaving the sheriff's. "I'm not asking for permission. I'm just doing what I think is right." The sheriff didn't say another word. He motioned for Jack to take a seat, and Jack did, his mind racing with the uncertainty of what the future would hold. The woman sat silently across from him, her hand still bound, but she didn't seem concerned. Her calmness, her strength, it was unsettling in its own way. As the night wore on, Jack and the woman sat in silence. The clock ticked loudly in the quiet room. Jack's thoughts were consumed with the choices ahead, the paths that were opening up before him. He had made a decision, but he didn't know what consequences it would bring. The town was divided, and some would never forgive him for what he had done. But deep down, Jack knew he couldn't turn back now. The woman had changed something in him. She had made him question the world he had known, the world of fear and violence. And whatever happened next, Jack knew one thing for certain. He couldn't ignore the truth he had found in her eyes. He would have to stand by it no matter the cost. The silence between them spoke volumes, and Jack realized that the journey he had started had only just begun.